Hey guys, welcome back. BDCKR here. We're back with our weekly P&Q&C&A&T. This is season 6, episode 17. And we're back in the same room, and the workflow's a little bit different.
And I should explain why I think you're laughing so hard, because this is our, sixth take of just the intro?
Yeah.
Because it took me forever to figure out that I gotta stop clicking on certain things that I normally do.
Yes.
And so I actually had to set up the screens so that the one thing was overlapping another, so I physically could not actually do the wrong thing that I did 3 times in a row.
Yeah, because Windows Movie Maker, you're used to clicking the full screen button to get it started playing instead of the play button in the bottom. But if you full screen it, it removes the script from your second monitor. So it took you 3 takes to do that right, and then the next few takes was just me laughing at the fact that you had to physically cover up the button to do the wrong thing because your muscle memory kept kicking in.
So you're almost done your exams.
Almost done my exams.
You got one more week left, so we're just taking advantage of you being back. We're filming a little bit earlier than we normally do. We'll post at the same time.
Yeah, it takes a little bit less work.
And it's actually more of a conversation like normal. Mm-hmm. But
and we can communicate with hand gestures in a way that does not come across to the people on the podcast. I know we gesticulate more when we're actually in the room together, which is not particularly useful to anybody.
Yes, except for us.
Yeah.
So our explanation P is for podcast and Patreon and patrons, because our patrons on Patreon have made it possible to make this a podcast and give
lots of P's.
Yeah, and to get lots of P. Made it worth giving up ad revenue to allow everyone the option to listen to this as just a podcast without being tied to YouTube.
For all 15 of you.
All 15 of you. Oh, is it still only 15?
I don't know. It's pretty low, yeah.
So, but it's also, an alternative. I think the last week I screwed up a bit and I didn't balance the audio properly, so that on the specials for Wonder Woman...
it was way too loud.
52, yeah. She was a little bit loud and drowning us out, which is not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah,
for some
but it's an audio file only version of the podcast if you want it. And you can check out links in the description if you're on the video, if you want to listen to it in the podcast format.
Right.
Q is for questions, because it started as a Q&A before we kept adding letters because we thought it was funny. C is for comments, because sometimes they weren't questions, and that was the first letter that we added. A is for answers. We answer questions, sometimes actual questions, sometimes implied questions, sometimes we answer our own questions, especially for pronunciation of words. And then T is just for talking, because a lot of times we just ramble and we start with a sort of prompt from a comment, but it doesn't end up where the comment actually is trying to lead us.
So I think this is why they call them oral histories when it's an interview thing, because I think the first thing we added might have actually been T.
T for talking?
Yeah, Q&A&T. That sounds more right, and it seems more like the direction we go, because a lot of times we're not actually...
Oh, yeah, we did. We added
just
T,
rambling.
and then we added C. That's true.
Yeah. So...
Yeah.
I want to go back to last week's talking, but just to maybe expound and expand on a particular thing where we talked about books.
And I think talked about a lot of books.
We left out a few important ones that didn't come to mind. I think, the problem is when, at least I've read a lot that I don't remember specifically.
Yeah.
But I do remember how I feel. Like when I see the title and the author again, I remember how I feel. So I just took a quick look on the shelves afterwards, and I thought, man, these are some excellent books that I think would probably have broad appeal.
Okay.
So an easy one is the Expanse series, because it's a popular TV show, and and we've talked about how the audience for TV show is orders of magnitude bigger than that for books.
Yeah, it's a lot easier to have people jump from the TV show to the book.
Right. So it starts with Leviathan Wakes. It is grand, and if you've seen the show, you'll know it's grand scale kind of space. Well, actually, I shouldn't say that. In the book, it is. I haven't actually seen the show. It's grand scale space opera, and I think if you like the show, I can say with some confidence that the books are kind of amazing.
We can't actually make that comparison, though, because we don't know how the show compares to the books.
That's true.
If you like the show, you'll probably like the books, because
it's the same storyline, and I think
the books are quite good.
And they're dense. I can't imagine that the TV show can cover nearly as much as the book does.
Yeah, that's
because
true.
In general, adaptations don't. And this is where we go off a little bit onto something that's maybe a little bit less popular. Because if you like The Expanse, then you really should try it. And I wish you'd had the chance to read this before I could recommend it, but I'm just going to dive in anyways. If you like the books, you've got to try David Brin's Uplift Universe. And Star Tide Rising is probably the most... well, that and Uplift War, they're probably the two most famous, because Star Tide Rising won the Hugo Nebula.
Mm-hmm.
I think Uplift War won the Nebula Award, or maybe just the Hugo one just won. But it actually started off with Sundiver back in 1980. And then after those sort of three main ones, he did another trilogy that was... Because each story... each of the first three books were jumping around from different perspectives in the same universe.
Okay.
And the last three were three parts of sort of one story, because it all stayed in the same area with recurring characters, which the other books did not do. And it's been, I guess, 20 years, it feels like, it has been 20 years since the last one. And I'm hoping that he goes back to it, because he's still alive. And I'm just not sure what's going to happen with that. But they were really excellent space
maybe
opera.
Not too likely after 20 years, but who knows?
Yeah. Other space opera, like big grand scale kind of stuff. Do you remember Werner Vinge's A Fire Upon the Deep?
That's the one with Zones of Thought, right?
That's right. Yeah. Exactly. And then it followed with a Deepness in the Sky. And they were, again, excellent grand scale kind of science fiction.
Those were interesting. If I remember correctly, I don't think this is too much of a spoiler. One of the main ways that stuff worked in the universe was that there was actually like places where different levels of technology were like allowed. Like there was almost like a sort of baseline level of complexity in the universe in different locations.
Right.
And so there was only certain places that allowed for certain levels of like complexity. So you'd go into like the wrong place and then you wouldn't be able to use whatever tech you had if it was too advanced.
That's right. There's a third book I think neither of us have read. It's called The Children of the Sky. I noticed that after, when I was sort of just making sure I got all the titles right.
Yeah, I don't think I've read it, but I'm not sure.
Which means that one more thing to be added to our reading list.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to recommend, because what occurred to me too afterwards was, like I said, I'm usually left with a really strong emotional impression of a book. I don't always necessarily remember the details. And the same way I felt about Replay, I felt about A Boy's Life.
A Boy's Life was really good.
By Robert McCammon. And it's that moment where at the end of it you feel like the world is just full of possibilities. Does that sound right? Does that sound fair?
Yeah, it's like a coming of age story that has like
it's action
a lot of weird stuff in it. It's one of those books that you explain individual plot points and you keep forgetting that stuff was in the book, and then by the time you've got like the laundry list of things that happen, you're like, wow, that was a lot. That was a lot to have gone on in that book that I don't necessarily remember.
So they're clearly different books, right? Because Replay, you can summarize it in a couple sentences, right? Yeah, it's basically like Groundhog Day but serious and
long.
And Boy's Life was not. But both of them left me with that same feeling at the end, where like I said, the world is just
interesting.
It's interesting, and it's
There's lots of little stuff. I remember specific plot points of Boy's Life, just as sort of like eclectic and not like placed in the context of a larger narrative, but there also is a larger narrative, and like it's quite good.
Down in the Dark. And I also want to mention Spin by Robert Charles Wilson.
I don't think I've read this one.
You have.
Have I?
That was Joe Walton recommended it to you.
Oh, was this the Arches or something?
I don't know, but there was an alien life form. And you know what? Hold on. I'm just going to step away from the microphone for a moment.
Yeah.
And I'm going to pull the book off the shelf so I can read the back.
Yeah, because I don't remember having read this. It's possible that I did, but the title at least is not evocative of anything to me. Okay, here we go. We've got...
You grab it?
Spin.
I'm just... Because I pulled a few things. You know what's sad? And at the same time is I've got a ton of books, and I wish I had the time to reread a bunch of them, because the other thing that occurred to me was Louis Shiner wrote Glimpses, which won the World Fantasy Award, and it was about lost music, and, well, I shouldn't, that doesn't quite explain what it is. So this guy, his marriage is breaking down, and he realizes that he's able to, find these sort of famous lost albums from, say, the Beatles or the Beach Boys, and he'd have some sort of dream. I can't even remember the details, but he'd have some sort of dream, and he would end up having CDs of these albums that shouldn't have existed. And I know that was sort of the big plot point, but what I was overwhelmingly left with the impression of, that's not a great sentence, the impression that I was overwhelmingly left with is that of how painful and powerful the breakdown of his marriage was. Really, really good.
Okay, so Spin is about there's a barrier around the earth and time passes really fast outside the barrier. So there's an impending apocalypse. Just because the heat death of the sun and everything is going to happen much, much quicker. Yeah. That's interesting. So I don't remember that at all.
You have read that.
I'm remembering, like, it sounds vaguely familiar, but I totally don't remember reading it.
Yeah, so I think what I'm gonna do is maybe take another look at the shelf and come up with stuff that probably has broader appeal, because I think there's lots of books that can speak really directly to you if it's the right book for you.
Yeah.
But it's very rare that you have a book that I'd be happy to recommend to a lot of people.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so there we go. That's some wrap up from last time. Let's go to our first question. This one comes from Philip W, S, and they say, "Hey BDCKR, been watching your content for a while now and still love it. Just wondering, what's your view on Christianity?" And I have to say, this type of question is definitely not the kind of thing that I was expecting from where we started as a gaming channel. I can say that from where we have been recently, it's an appropriate question for Philip to have asked us. You know what I mean? Like, I think that's a reasonable question to have asked, but it's still sort of surprising when you take a step back and be like, we do have gaming next to your name, and we mostly do mobile game content. So it's a sort of, it's a weird.
But Jesus,
it does make sense. I mean, I can totally see where Philip's coming from when asking this.
Okay, so can I start? Is that okay?
Yeah, you can start. For sure.
So this is like, when people have to qualify things by saying I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not a theologian, but so maybe let's start with defining our terms, because Christianity, it's a really broad term that lumps together everyone who believes in Jesus Christ as, the Son of God with a capital G.
Yeah.
And so my view on Christianity is sort of hand in hand with my view on organized religion.
Yeah, I think for me they're pretty close to, if not the same.
Well, there's so many organized religions though, right? Like there's certain evils. That's not quite the right word, because evil is such a loaded thing that's really religious, but there's certain problems that come with any kind of organized religions, and I think there's certain problems that come with Christianity specifically.
And I don't know if we would say if they're inherent to the religions or if they're just in the execution of. Like, yeah, I think for sure, organized religion, it's bad when people use it as a justification mostly for hate or for doing...
Or to the tribal kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, because, the hate flows from that, right? Where you think, this is my circle, this is my tribe.
Yeah.
And either you're in my tribe...
In groups and out groups.
Or you're... Exactly.
Yeah. So I would say, like, recently, the thing that is probably... Not, like, super recently, but just in the last, like, while, like, set of years, decades, the issue that I've had with Christianity is using that as a justification for discrimination against LGBTQ folk and, some, like, different people who are like non-believers and stuff like that. I think that's been my sort of, if I had to pinpoint, just in what I'm aware of. I'm not talking about like the church overall, because I don't have that sort of context.
So what's even better is, all right, so here, we should probably give some of our background. I mean, we've talked about it before, but let's just reiterate. I was raised Catholic. I am what I consider myself a lapsed Catholic, which is a fancy way of saying I don't really go to church anymore, not even Easters or Christmases. Yeah. And I find some of the doctrine problematic. And what was interesting was that of all the developments recently in Catholicism that I find positive is Pope Francis. Yeah. And he's been much more inclusive. He's been, if he feels like to me, much more thoughtful.
Yeah.
And today there was an article in the paper how the previous Pope, I think Pope Benedictine, or Pope Benedict? It must be Pope Benedict. He's kind of made a bit of a mess of Catholicism. So he was the Pope before. He was the second Pope ever to just say, you know what, I'm not going to do this anymore.
Oh, see, so he threw in the towel.
He threw in the towel. Everybody else dies. He threw in the towel. And the only one other Pope ever in the history of Catholicism has ever done that.
Interesting.
But what the problem is, because of the way Catholicism's set up, is that the Pope is sort of the incontrovertible, infallible voice of the church. So he gets to decide when there's anything that's up to interpretation, his decision goes. So there were people when he abdicated, is that right? Because that's for kings.
I don't know.
So when he stepped down, there was some fear that having two living, I mean, technically there's only one Pope. One is
having two living people who are either currently or at one time held the position of Pope.
Right, because he's stepping down as Pope. Is he no longer bishop? And one of the points they were making was they thought that the more appropriate term would be, you know how emeritus is, you know, they used to be like emeritus, that Latin term.
I don't know what that means.
Okay, so because the Bishop of Rome is supposed to be the Pope.
Yeah.
So people were saying, well, it would have been more appropriate if you just stepped down and said that he's now the emeritus Bishop of Rome, but he's actually calling himself the emeritus Pope. And he still disagrees. He thinks that the Catholic Church should still be taking a hard line, and that the reason why we're having so much trouble now, it's because of the decadence of the 60s and the free sex and all that kind of...
That's what Benedict says?
Yes.
Okay.
So, and again, obviously this is not just Christianity, which is where the topic started, right?
Yeah.
But to me, that's an example of... like the ills, that's the word I'm looking for, not evils, but the ills of organized religion, right? Where the idea of, you know, love your neighbor, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, that kind of stuff, I think that's kind of cool.
Yeah, I think that, so we've gone through some of the cons, which is when there's sort of hate or discrimination or just otherwise religion being sort of used as a justification for what I would just call negative behavior in general.
Right.
But I think there's a lot of good to be
can I speak?
About it too.
So I'm going to speak to this. Organized religion has been an amazing source of strength and support and community for people who need it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not just Christianity, right? That's true of any organized religions where you can really develop a community. I mean, that's the positive of having a tribe, is you have a tribe.
Yeah, like social programs, just helping people in need, giving people a sense of belonging, purpose, making people, you know, more comfortable or confident in the face of uncertainty or stuff that they can't control.
Right. I mean, so I'm going to speak maybe a bit more personally.
Yeah.
That, you know, a couple of years ago, when my mother died, your grandmother, she found a lot of comfort in her Catholicism. I wouldn't, but I don't begrudge anybody who gets that, right? Like, there's something clearly very powerful
and
about having faith.
That's a positive. There's no negative side to being you know, more okay with illness or bad health or coming to the end of your life.
Right. So this is why I'm still conflicted a bit, right? So because there's so many examples. So when I was thinking about this, one of the examples that came to mind was the idea that people use the term Judeo-Christian, and it didn't occur to me previously that the idea of even saying Judeo-Christian as some sort of a grouping is really Islamophobic. Like, in a way that isn't intuitively obvious, but with just thinking about it. All right, so I had to look up this term. So you've got at least 3 religions that I know of that are tied together, believing in the one God, and that's the God of Abraham. And so you call that Abrahamic religions.
Okay.
So Judaism, Christianity, and Muslims in Islam, they all believe in this one capital G God.
Yeah, okay.
All right, so Judaism says, Jesus Christ was a false Messiah. So he, led people the wrong way.
Yeah.
That's why it's funny when people say Jews for Christians. Basically, it's like Christians. It's like...
Isn't it Jews for Jesus?
Oh, that's right. Yes. I don't know how I screwed that up. Yeah, it's Jews for Jesus. So Judaism says Jesus Christ was a false Messiah.
Yeah.
Christianity says he was the Messiah. He was the Son of God. And Islam says he was a prophet of God.
Okay.
So what's funny to me was, so when people say Judeo-Christian, to me,
Yeah.
Jews and Christians actually have less in common. I mean, in terms of belief, skin color might be a different issue, but in terms of belief, Jews believe...
Or maybe in terms of surrounding culture, too. I don't know, actually.
Well, I guess...
Potentially.
All right, so Judaism is a little... Jewishness is a little different from other kinds of religions, because there's a cultural Judaism and a religious Judaism.
Mm-hmm.
So what's funny to me is that you actually have a term to lump Jews and Christians together, but they seem to actually have less in common. Jews think Jesus was bad. Christians think Jesus was, the best.
Very good.
Yeah, he was very good. And Muslims think he was actually good, but he was just a prophet. He wasn't actually the Messiah. So they're still waiting for the Messiah.
That's a very simplified term, but that's, I think,
But so it's weird, right? So the idea is, to me, Muslims didn't think Jesus was damaging the way Jews do. And maybe somebody who's Jewish or Christian or Muslim who's listening to this can speak to it maybe a little bit.
Or multiple people.
Yeah, because I'm not, like I said, I'm not a theologian. This is my layman's understanding of it, coming at it from as a Catholic.
Yeah.
Or a lapsed Catholic.
Yeah.
But...
yeah, I also can't really speak to what you're saying, because I don't know.
You've been raised... Well, how would you characterize it? I'd say agnostic.
Yeah, I think agnostic
not
is
atheist.
better, because... Yeah, I think atheist also has a certain connotation, too, of maybe... not always, but I think there's a certain connotation of atheist being like, oh, not only do I not believe, but nobody else should believe either.
Because you're wrong.
There's like a sort of moral high ground.
They're taking a stand, whereas somebody who... Yeah, I think it's still relatively open.
Yeah.
For you.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we touched on this, right? So, it's as a source of tribalism, I think it's bad. As a source of support and community, it's great.
Yeah.
We're talking Christianity now and organized religion. But even within each religion, it's a potential source of conflict. Even when you've got even within your own tribe, you see it with Pope Francis and ex-Pope Benedict. And to me, that's the opposite of what religion pretends to be.
Yeah. So I think it really depends on... I think religion in and of itself doesn't have to be negative. I think a lot of the stuff that ends up being negatively connotated with religion isn't inherent to it.
Right.
But I also think that a lot of the positives, some of them are actually inherent, I think.
Yeah.
But not all of them have to be either. And I think depending on your interpretations of various texts, there is also maybe some inherent, like, kind of cannon fodder for discrimination or for some not great practices.
Okay, so you said the word canon, and part of me was thinking like canonical, kind of like story-wise.
Yeah.
I don't know why I was going there, and it's not like you even went very far along that line, but I was thinking along the lines of, like how the New Testament is sort of the fan fiction, and Old Testament was like the canon.
But the Old Testament was also a lot more brutal, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. That's what I'm thinking, though, because I see here, and here's where I'm going to show my ignorance. I think does Judaism acknowledge the Old Testament as being canon?
I don't know. I don't know enough about organized religion.
Yeah.
We're not the right people to talk about this. So, I mean, Philip was asking for our opinion. That was the name. Yeah, Philip was asking for our opinion, but it turns out we're maybe not the best people to speak on this.
Well, we're good to speak on our opinion. My opinion is, true. I think Christianity has a lot of good, but they need to maybe get their house in order a bit to not be a source of, to negate the good that they actually contribute to the world.
To not negate the good, you mean?
To not negate the good. That's right. Too many negatives, but yeah, that's exactly, you got it right.
Yeah. Okay, so there we go. The next question comes from Apocalypse, and they say, what do you two think of the new Joker movie?
I am agnostic when it comes to the Joker movie.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, especially with the 1-2 punch of that question.
Yeah, I've seen the trailers. it's not out yet, right?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think I'm definitely the wrong person to ask for a number of reasons, not the least of which is the fact that I watch very few movies in the theater.
Yeah, and I just think I'm not sure for this sort of thing. Like I think you have to see it when it comes out, right? Because for a lot of stuff you don't know. I mean, people were pretty happy with the Suicide Squad trailer.
That's true.
People saw the music and some of the moments, and they got positive reception to that. And so I think for stuff like this, I think we're definitely not like super excited. But to be fair, I don't think like I'm not even that excited for Endgame, the new Avengers movie that comes out on the 25th. That comes out really soon, actually.
Oh, that's right. It's this week.
Yeah, and so like I'm not even following that too much. So for people who have a lot of content related to superheroes, I think we're actually probably not super engaged with that scene right now.
So my biggest problem, I think, besides not watching a lot of movies, is that I don't read comics nearly as much. I mean, we do this channel about a DC Comics superhero supervillain fighting game.
Yeah.
And when I was growing up, I read a lot of DC books. I collected a lot of DC books. Some of my favorites were DC, even back when I couldn't even buy them, and all I could get at the library was Amethyst and Warlord.
Yeah.
Those are both DC titles. Lots of fun to read. But I think there's something broken a little bit in the industry if we're talking comic books.
Yeah.
Where I saw there's a writer, Nick Mamitas, whose conceptualization of the comic industry, it really rang true for me.
Yeah.
Where he was saying that the comics themselves now are basically ads for other media.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe potential source material too.
Yeah, okay.
And so that the industry relies very little on the actual comic books. And so the comic books, they're marketing them towards collectors and not readers. So, for example, you've got a comic book that comes out once a week that's got maybe 22 pages of story.
Yeah.
And it costs, in Canada at least, like what, $4 or $5 a pop?
Oh my goodness, yeah.
And I remember when for $5 you could get one of those thick prestige format, for example, Green Arrow, the Longbow Hunters, or The Dark Knight Returns.
Yeah.
Each of those books was a prestige format. The Longbow Hunters was 3 books. The whole Dark Knight Returns was only 4 books, and you got a lot of story for that.
Yeah.
And so what you've done is you've pushed out a lot of the readers, and it's catering to the collectors, and so it ends up being, I don't know, what's like a stagnant kind of industry where there's a lot of the appeal is for the same audience that's been buying it forever. And I can't say that's entirely true for everything, right? Because what saved it a little bit is coming out with graphic novels, whereas comic books before, they used to just come and go.
Yeah.
Now they basically collect and reprint everything.
Mm.
So there's definitely still some sort of appeal to current readers.
Yeah, and I think my friend Alex keeps up with comics, actually. Pretty good. I don't know how he does it. I think he has, like, online reading. He's not buying physical comics, I know that much.
Okay.
So I don't know his method of getting access to them, but I think so. There are definitely still people reading comics, but I think the comic books themselves, you really have to have a lot of money, right? Because I think somebody like Alex would actually be one of the prime sort of markets, right? The prime demographic for comic books, right? Somebody who's young-ish, right, but who's got a little bit of disposable income.
A lot of disposable income.
Well, I don't know.
Like I said, I don't know how much those subscription services cost.
Yeah, but so. But I think they're definitely not making a lot of money off him now. So if he's buying some sort of subscription services for online comics, then that's some. But yeah, I think the physical stuff is definitely doesn't have the same sort of selling power.
All right, so now with comics then relying so much on the media, right? And we've talked about this. The audience for a movie is orders of magnitude bigger than the audience for a comic book.
Yeah.
So they are
the investment's also a lot more. Costs way more to make a movie.
That's true. No, yeah, I hadn't thought of that either. So they can't. I guess where did this started from talking about how about the Joker?
Yeah.
And maybe
with Joaquin Phoenix.
The what the unspoken bias I have then is that the story in a movie can't be that sophisticated because it's only a couple hours.
Yeah.
And so my favorite stories when it comes to iconic characters like the Joker are usually specific comic book storylines.
Like The Killing Joke.
Like The Killing Joke that Alan Moore did with Brian Boland. Yeah.
Yeah. That was seminal. Is that the term?
Yes.
Joker story.
Right, because up until that point, I think this is what I'd read. I didn't go to the primary source like I usually like to, but that the Joker's origin story had been up in the air a little bit. It was a bit mysterious, and despite the fact that the Joker is sort of the ultimate unreliable narrator.
Yeah.
That he was somehow the definitive origin story. I think that was a mistake when people started thinking this was how the Joker started. It's that this was one potential version of himself that he sees.
Yeah.
And that was sort of the point. Oh, and what was cool about the story was Alan Moore did a bunch of things that he ended up doing again in Watchmen. With the shifting, where there's the similar panels that shift the action from one to another, like really effectively, and it plays to the strengths of the artist that he was
Watchmen
working
was
with.
quite good too.
Yeah. I mean, it was also problematic in different ways, but it was also seminal. Like, it was something that kind of story, Watchmen, had not been done before. And it was quite spectacular.
Yeah. So, getting back to the original question, I guess.
Yeah, so he already got the short answer. We don't even have to do it too long, didn't read.
Yeah.
But, because I'll tell you what, there's certain stories that I think that I would really be excited to see. Joker's not necessarily one of them, because I think Joker's been done perfectly in The Killing Joke.
Yeah.
And if they don't do The Killing Joke story,
and there was a Killing Joke animated movie that was apparently
was
really
there?
awful. Yeah, because what I heard was that there was a part of it that was basically The Killing Joke, and then that wasn't the full thing, so they had to fill for time. So there was a half hour right at the beginning, which was took the dark to mean like profanity and like sexual content, or I don't know, actually just profanity, but was very obviously not written by or conceived by the same guy, where the Killing Joke part of it, which was just the comic, was actually decent. It was serviceable. It was just like an animated Killing Joke. And then the part before it was totally unnecessary and just like really bad.
So, all right, so what's weird to me about The Killing Joke, well, not weird, like, to make it animated, I feel that it's because Brian Boland's art was so realistic.
Yeah.
It feels more real, and it lends a lot more weight to the kind of dark things that are happening. And that when you do it animated, you're going to struggle a bit because it's going to feel
like getting from one impactful image to the next doesn't necessarily have the same sort of like follow through for the whole thing.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah, so to me that's a weird sort of creative choice.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I haven't seen it. I've heard, I think it was H Bomber guy maybe, or somebody do a review of it and said that it sucked. I think the video is called The Killing Joke Movie Sucks, and then in brackets mostly the comics industry or something like that.
Oh. Yeah, I feel sad. I mean, I feel a lot of nostalgia for comic books because I grew up reading a lot of them.
Yeah.
But back in time when stuff was cheap. Or, well, not cheap, but cheaper. And the
More
cost
affordable.
of entry. Yeah, it was... So there's not a lot of movie or comic books that I would really like to see as a movie, but there's one that came to mind when we were talking about this. Astonishing X-Men, and it's probably not a coincidence that it's written by Joss Whedon, and it's drawn... So Joss Whedon, Firefly, Buffy, the Vampire Slayer.
Yeah.
And it's drawn by John Cassaday, who does a different kind of style, but his art style is also realistic, but it also takes advantage of the history of the characters.
Yeah. So
that it gives you these moments of clarity and these powerfully emotional moments that are the sort of the payoff for knowing these people for years and having read stories about them.
Yeah.
And I would really love to see that. I think it would make a great movie. And I don't know if...
I mean, there's been a lot of X-Men movies, so that's... Right?
Yeah, I guess my fear is that with so many movies that there's at some point there's going to be a burnout, and they're going to say, "Yeah, forget it." You know how they rebooted Spider-Man
Yeah.
like twice in the last
they've done
15
so
years?
much Spider-Man, yeah. But apparently the new stuff is quite good.
People were saying that about the first Tobey Maguire Spider-Man too, and it only took a couple more movies to burn that one out.
That's fair. Yeah. But there's been a lot of good Spider-Man content recently, right? With Into the Spider-Verse.
Oh, that was good.
Then, Homecoming, right? It was supposed to be really good.
Haven't seen Homecoming.
I have not either, but I've heard it's quite good. I've heard it's like one of the better Marvel movies recently.
All right, so this is why I'm kind of a little bit scared of what's happening, because Homecoming is the only Spider-Man movie I think the only superhero movie in the Marvel's cinematic universe that hasn't been available on Netflix.
That's true.
Because Sony still owns the rights, and they're keeping it for their own streaming platform.
Which is crap.
So all these streaming platforms are inventing cable again.
Yeah, they're splitting off. They're fracturing. I saw something about that recently. Yeah, where it's like, streaming platforms are only good when there's a really small number that have everything.
Right.
And then the second that they fragment out again, you've just got cable for the internet.
Right, and then you're just paying. I guess there is a small advantage where you're only paying for the ones that you want.
Yeah.
But then, as it fragments, but each accumulates a big library of media.
It's really when stuff starts pulling away and taking away from what was already there.
Yeah.
Because stuff taking away from Netflix, right? With Disney trying to do its own thing, and so not like putting Disney content on it anymore. That's like a big
Disney and Marvel and. Yeah, that's why one of the reasons why I was reluctant to. I mean, we have Netflix now, but one of the reasons why I was reluctant to get it in Canada.
Yeah.
Because it seems like the content on Netflix in Canada is much more limited than what people are seeing in the States.
Yeah, that's true. It's still better. It's still a service. It's worse than it could be otherwise, just because of distribution. But it is still better than not Netflix.
Yeah.
And it's definitely Netflix originals are a pretty compelling value, cost value sort of proposition.
Yeah, it's not bad. It's funny because I'll now at work with the internet connection at lunch when I skip now I watch Netflix instead of trying to bring my own movies to watch.
Yeah, it's more convenient. I saw
it's easy.
Where was it that I saw this? There was a quote from Gabe Newell that people often use. He's the creator of Steam.
Guy.
Yeah. Where they say where he said piracy is most often a service problem.
Yes.
So,
I totally. Yeah. He's not the first person that said that, right?
Yeah, but he has a quite good quote about basically, if you have like, for example, like a game is like region locked, right?
Right.
And you have to like go get like a physical copy or whatever. There's different things that make it more or less work, and the money is always one factor, right, to add or remove value. But like, I think Netflix has totally decreased the amount of piracy for movies and TV shows because it makes it so much easier to not pirate.
Right.
It makes it like easy, makes it pretty cheap. It's easy to get subtitles. It's so much less work. It's much less of a hassle.
Yeah, it's convenient for sure.
Yeah. And there was
we've seen that a ton.
Yeah.
Napster, I mean, they used to be huge.
Mm-hmm.
And once people started pricing music like reasonably and make it available streaming and for download. Yeah, sorry, I interrupted you. You were saying something?
No, there was I also saw something by a game developer talking about G2A, which is this like key resale site, and the developer was saying they actually prefer you pirate their stuff than get it on G2A, get their resold keys. And they had a variety of reasons, but basically their issue with it was that G2A was sort of positioning itself to look legitimate. So it was positioning itself to look like a similar service that Steam was providing, but it was actually a lot closer to piracy in its like mechanical operation.
So it's giving the veneer of respectability, without actually paying the creators properly. Yeah.
And one of the things that would happen frequently too is actually people using it for credit card fraud, where they'd buy a bunch of keys for something, and then. So the developers who were getting that happen and they would be sold at much reduced rates would have people paying for games, not getting any money for the developers, and it would actually make the developers unsure how much money they had.
So that's like money laundering.
Yeah, basically.
They're taking stolen currency basically in the form of credit cards.
Yeah, because G2A is just a marketplace, right? So, but they're not, because they're not responsible. They apparently were like kind of washing their hands of any responsibility. So it was enabling piracy, and it was enabling people to basically give money to the game developers and then take it away from them. And I think there was something about credit card fees or whatever, where the game developers were actually getting screwed over by these people, and so people are still paying for their content, feeling like they're getting it from a legitimate source. Right. So they didn't have any of the same sort of guilt associated with piracy, or the understanding that they weren't supporting anybody.
None of that little bit of resistance.
Yeah.
Like that internal resistance to doing something that's potentially wrong.
Yeah. So it was. But so just it's interesting now that they're splintering back. I think we might see more sort of piracy. Right? Because if somebody has a couple streaming services,
right,
and then they just want to watch one movie, right?
Right.
Like if they look and it's not on Netflix, and it's like, oh well, Spider-Man: Far From Home is like on whatever other streaming service, or that's the new one that's not out yet, or Homecoming.
Right.
They might just say, okay, well, I mean, I've got a couple streaming services. I guess I'll just see if I can find this online. You know?
Right. Right. Yeah. I guess we'll figure it out. That dovetails nicely with the censorship stuff I was reading or watching on YouTube.
Yeah.
But I've gotten distracted, so I didn't quite follow through and finish all of it. But that's what I've been meaning to get to.
Oh, there's a video series on censorship?
I talked about it a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, you know what I wanted to mention when we were talking about religion, and we got sort of sidetracked. Wow, how surprising. So the last week, Notre Dame Cathedral had a big fire.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that struck me from commentary on Twitter was somebody was pointing out that they've had donations of more than $500 million.
There's been a lot of hot takes.
Yeah. This is the one that was interesting to me, though, that it's $500 million for this monument, right?
Yeah.
And the price for fixing Flint, Michigan, in the States, the problem with lead in the water, would be like $55 million.
Yeah.
And clearly, it's obviously not the same thing, right?
Yeah.
But, there's not a lot of tourism return that you're going to get for your $55 million, like you would for the cathedral. But in terms of the scale and cost, it's striking, right? Because clearly, these people who are donating the money, they value this way more, this monument to creativity, to human engineering, maybe, to art. They value that way more than the potential lives that would be saved.
Yeah, and I've also seen stuff talking about just the cultural facet of it, and how like when similar things happen with other religious buildings or other like buildings of comparable like
cultural significance
in different cultures, that they tend to be not as talked about. And so there's been people being like, oh, well, we're really interested in European history but not in the history of anybody else. And then there's other people who are saying like, okay, yeah, but to try to take away importance from it at this moment is doing sort of the same thing, where you're trying to minimize somebody else's culture.
It's like the joke too soon, right? It's like it's never the right time to talk about gun control.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the answer is, but it's definitely very striking, right?
Yeah, because it's interesting, and I think that is fair when stuff happens in other cultures. I mean, obviously one of the issues is that you don't hear about the story, so you can't you don't really have a point of comparison because everybody's heard about Notre Dame, and the entire point of the stuff that the other people are talking about is that we don't talk about it. So it's
right. So the time when you're actually thinking adjacent to it would be a great time to talk about, because then you're already in that frame of mind to think, we need to help these people. I saw that kind of hot take too, because they were talking about some churches in the States that had gotten burnt down, and that they needed money probably a little bit more than Notre Dame.
Yeah.
Are we gonna try to do a French accent? Notre Dame.
Atrocious.
Yeah. Well. So we've got another question.
Yep, we've got another question. This one comes from
Stries. Rhymes with fries.
Sorry. Yeah. And this question...
It's an injustice question.
It's an injustice question. We're only 44 minutes in, and we started talking about injustice. We've dealt with Christianity. Thank you for coming to our theological YouTube channel, BDCKR Gaming. Now for an injustice question. What would you recommend for a third teammate? The Joker, Killing Joke Joker, Shazam Prime, and then question mark.
Yeah. So this is kind of a funny question because we've addressed it in a couple different ways. I should probably link the videos that we've done on it.
Yeah.
So we've done one video where Joker he's geared for basic damage, and Shazam Prime is there to take advantage of the power. And this is before Tantu Totem.
Mm-hmm.
So the reason why that matters is because so the idea is with Shazam, you want your...
There goes my phone.
You need to do a super, so use 3 bars, and then you trigger the passive, and you get unlimited specials and increased damage and decreased damage taken.
Yeah.
For a short period of time.
And he was quite defined right when he first came out in the gold packs.
Right. Because that was kind of fun. So the mistake I think that people were making, though, when they were using Joker that way, was to make him too weak.
So he'd get knocked out easily.
Right. And so it means that when people are facing you, they can just sit there, block, and wait until Joker tags out.
Mm-hmm.
So we've also done a Shazam team without killing Joker because Tantu Totem means he doesn't need Joker anymore, and he can get the same effect. He won't get to the 3rd bar that fast. Well, he'll get to the 3rd bar faster, but he still doesn't need his 3rd bar, and he doesn't even need his passive anymore to take advantage of a lot of power, a high damage special 2, and like a pretty strong character.
Yeah.
So I think if you're gonna have Tantu Totem, then this kind of loadout or team bit composition, you don't need Joker. You can just take Shazam.
Yeah.
And then what you need are other guys that will buff Shazam or to serve a different role. Because to me, Shazam is best as a specialist.
Yeah, so then maybe a tank.
Maybe a tank, maybe a basic damage dealer. But so the other thing is, if you don't have Tantu Totem and you're still using Killing Joker as your power source, I guess, and keep in mind that he's going to get knocked out, then for most people you're looking at getting another specialist, and anybody who's good. I mean, to me, the best specialist, because most of the time if you're aiming for 1 bar of power, you don't need somebody to generate power for you, because most of the time you can do that yourself.
Yeah.
So it's going to be somebody who's got a great special 2, and to me, in my mind, that's always Ares, where it's unblockable, and if they survive it, they can't block for, I don't know, like 8 seconds or something.
And there's also some splash damage if you want to gear him out for that.
Yeah, with his own bloody sword.
Yeah.
The sword of
the War God?
No.
Or something? Blade of the War God?
Blade of the War God, that's right.
You said sword and then I
said blade, yeah.
Yeah. That's okay.
Because we're seeing an example right here, right? Injustice 2 Superman comes in, he's got 2 bars of power, and he's not going to have it for long, though, because he's going to get... I thought I was going to say he's going to get knocked out if we can tag in Wonder Woman, but yeah, he's not. So it's an interesting team to try to make Shazam Prime useful. I think his time as a top-tier character has passed. He's still fun, but he doesn't need Killing Joker unless you want to give somebody else a Tantu Totem or you don't have Tantu Totem.
Mm-hmm. So there we go. And I think here we've got... This was just a little bit of maybe entertaining. Okay. We've got a set of comments. So we've got the first one comes from Nicholas A, who just dropped in to let us know you guys are boring, and I think this was fine by itself, but I was quite entertained by sort of the set of comments that we got after this, and I don't know if we want to interpret them as people just having a little fun with him, defending us, maybe coming to our
yeah, I guess you're right. There's those two interpretations where some people are coming to help us out, which while we appreciate, we don't need because we're not that bummed out about this.
But I mean, I think we do appreciate, still at the end of the day. So we got a couple comments here. First one, I think, which bears talking about for just a second, from Ultimate Orange, and says, "You are gay." And if this is just an assertion, maybe this is somebody who knows Nicholas in his personal life and is just sort of telling a fact about him. I think that it's pretty fair to say that that's not true, but then that's fine. But if you're using "you are gay" as an insult, maybe step with us into 2019. We don't use that sort of terminology as a way of
using
insulting people.
How people identify in general, whether it's orientation, race, sex, whatever. It's not a great insult for a bunch of different reasons because it brings with it the whole ism that comes with it, right?
Yeah. So potentially well-meaning, but just maybe work on the content of the message.
Yeah, we appreciate the sentiment that you're sort of coming to our defense, but we'd much rather that you did it without actually having to put anybody else down.
Yeah, and then we've got Tommy E, which says, "Wow, thanks for contributing so much to the discussion." Then Strice again, "So is generic rap, but you seem to love it so much. You have multiple playlists." Then ES says, "You are gray," and then Apocalypse comes in and says, "I'm blue." So we've just got a couple of sort of assorted responses to Nicholas over here.
So all right, so we saw this independently, and when I first saw it, I thought it more along the lines of, you know, they were having fun at Nicholas A's expense, you know, the way cats will play with a mouse.
Yeah, and I think to me the entertaining one was Strice with the "So is generic rap, but you seem to love it so much you have multiple playlists," because to me that's you see Nicholas A and do the thing which we sometimes do, which is click on their profile and see what kind of person would make that kind of comment, because sometimes it's interesting to figure out. And Strice sort of narrowed in on something worth having opinions about.
Yeah. And that was the sort of the last comment. But can I maybe mention something else that I was thinking about this week?
Sure, yeah.
Mainly because it's NHL playoff season. It's also Raptors NBA playoff season. Raptors, go Raptors. That there's sort of funny systems for development. And when I say systems for development, I mean like there's careers that people can get into, like say medicine or sports or entertainment, that are all out of whack. So systems that select out early are probably better, like medicine, where everyone who ends up in it gets paid decently.
Yeah.
But they select out before you get into it, so you haven't committed a huge amount of time, or you're
resources.
not supposed to, right? To try to get where you want to be. And at the point where you're trying, there's still lots of other options.
Yeah.
Like you're not sort of tied in, and not just the playoffs, you being in school.
Yeah.
But then there's the other systems like sports entertainment, you know, actors, whatever. They select the few at the end. So the people at the end of it get paid astronomically. The ones that are successful get a huge amount of money.
But it mills through a ton of people who, for one reason or another, don't get much at all.
Right, because it's totally on the backs of the minor league players who don't end up in the show, in the majors, or the whatever.
Yeah, there's sort of side benefits leading up, like maybe people with like sports scholarships or stuff like that, where there's still sort of like there's a ton of people, and then at each stage, whoever gets whatever level of benefit sort of gets smaller and smaller.
But the scholarship seems like some sort of, to me it's a weird enticement, because people use that, so they get the scholarship, but then because the focus is so much on the sports, they don't even get the full value out of the scholarship by being able to take. Most of them don't get to take the courses that they want or have the time to spend to learn.
That's true. I guess it depends on what you consider the value, though, because the value might just be being able to continue to play on a team for free and then also get some bonus education. If the education isn't the focus, then the value isn't actually mainly from the education.
Well, especially since a lot of, say, for example, black basketball players, the really good ones, they're one and done.
Yeah.
So they get 1 year, they don't even get to, it's partly the education, but a big part of it is the credentials. So that's what opens up doors for you afterwards, so that you can get a job in, I don't know, whatever area that requires you to have a degree that's relevant. So it seems such a shame that they're like, what was it you were saying, that it grinds through, or it churns through?
Oh,
like
I don't even know what phrasing they used.
I thought that was exactly right, because what it's doing is, these are people who are the people at the top of the chain who are making millions and millions of dollars, have done it on the backs of all the people who never made it.
Yeah.
Because they need somebody to play against. They need cannon fodder.
Yeah, and if you just had way less people playing, also just on average you just have worse teams.
That's right.
Right, that's how you get people at that like high level skill, is just by having enough people doing it, enough people giving it a try, that you have an opportunity to make sure if somebody has the potential to be good, there's a lot higher likelihood that they actually play.
Yeah. And that takes us to the last fight.
There we go. So we're just about out of time here.
Yeah, so I'm going to point out again why I like this. So I should mention, too, this is on a different account than what we normally play this Justice League team with. So they are level 60 and Elite 10, and they're still handling the opposition pretty easily. Maybe it takes a little bit longer, but because we're seeing a lot of Astro Harness, and in this example with Batman Ninja Batman, we see the beauty of why this setup works in having Wonder Woman do it, because every time she whiffs on her special, because of Astro Harness, she gets to give her teammates more power. And that last one would have been smarter to do a special one, but Aquaman was already full up, so he was ready to basically rip into... Ooh, if I can get third, then Injustice 2 Superman will be coming in with a lot of damage over time. Oops. So maybe this is not going to be as fast as I thought, but look, see, he's bleeding out from Aquaman's... Oh, and it stopped. But he bled out mostly from Aquaman's specials.
I think here we can also talk about our Patreon and our patrons.
Okay, sure.
Because we also have a little bit of an announcement, some news, right? Maybe. So we have a Patreon, patreon.com/BDCKR. You can support us if you want. We've recently picked up a new patron. Picking which word to use in any given case is always so difficult. They're so similar that I always mess it up. But anyways, we have a new patron recently, and we also have a patron who's on their way out. So
Yes.
iProphet, we've had a good run. We'll miss ya. So we've got Console Peasant and Eddy G, who are supporting us at the highest last word tier. We have iProphet, who is for the next little bit at least, supporting us at the Your Message Here tier, and Daniel Simonson, Shawn Farrell, and now Aaron Mall, who support us on the credited level, not to mention Chris Wolf and Laszlo Jajades, who are supporting us on the gratitude tier. Thank you guys all so much for your support, and thank you to all of you for watching, listening, however you consume this. We'll see you next time. Komoda.